Trasa, Thomas, and Patrick going to talk about IE-NARR, it's about energy transitions, 3 case studies in Ireland looking at how communities will transition during this effort to address climate change. So I'll hand over straight away to Trasa. So thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much. And thanks everyone for coming today. So yeah, really delighted to introduce this project, Irish Energy Narratives in the Transition. So my name's Trasa Delockery. I'm in the School of English Drama and Film. My partners are Tomas Putencic, who's in School of Business and affiliated with ICRAG as well. And Dr. Pat Brody, who's in the School of Information and Communication Studies. And we're drawing on project partners as well from across colleges, and we're open to more project partners too. So if you're interested in anything we're saying today, or see an information gap that you could help us with, please do get in touch. And not mentioned on our slide here is Rosie O'Reilly, who's our artist in resident, who's formerly of Parody Studios and UCD, and we're in the middle of onboarding an RA as well. So yeah, I think we can. Do you want to take the next bit? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm Thomas. Just to give you a very quick idea of what are we talking about when we talk about energy narratives and where are we finding energy narratives. There's different ways in which we can approach that. Here are some of the formats that we're thinking might be relevant to this project. So literature, artistic production, social media, news media, but also community engagement, so that how narratives are registered at the community level. Could be less than formal, could be in discourse, could be in just at the community level in any kind of format. And the way we hope to approach that is we're casting quite a wide net as well for this, also given our different backgrounds. So we'll be using literary analysis, we're looking at environmental communication, but also discourse analysis and creative praxis, given we have an artist in residence as well for this project. So we're casting a really wide net, I think, is the sort of summary of that. Yeah. So.
Click me through. Yeah. And just to say as well, like, why are we looking at energy narratives? Because given all of our disciplines, this is something we take for granted, right? And it might not be too self-evident if you come from sciences. And one of the reasons we're looking at narratives is that learning, especially kind of at the local level, occurs through narrative. It occurs through the stories that people are telling to each other about the transitions that are underway. And these are experiential, effective, cultural and place-based. Attending to how communities reflect on energy transitions can give us an insight into their values, so what matters to them, what's important to them about how change is being mediated at a local level, but also how the future is being envisioned often for them rather than by them. Narrative offers a way of interrogating how sustainable futures are being imagined during energy transitions, through what forms, so through what images, again, what kind of stories, discourses, what modes, and for whom. A narrative is often regarded as a form of scenario modeling, right? So, and especially when we're talking about art forms or storytelling in their most kind of fictional form, right? They can help you to simulate or imagine alternate kind of futurities. And this is really important for local communities, right? Because what kind of future are they transitioning towards, and what does that look like for them? If it's one of prosperity, but also involves degrowth and decarbonisation, how do you get communities to be invested in that vision of the future, right? Like, how is it made tangible or visceral to them? These are really important questions that artists and authors are asking right now. And the eco-critic, or the energy critic, I should say, Sheena Wilson, says that we need to transform our imaginaries of who we are in relationship to this planet and to what futures are possible. So imagination and narrative at the center of that.
Yeah, so just in terms of our concrete objectives, we're going to be looking at how extractive energy past, contemporary action around energy infrastructures and energy transitions, and desired energy futures are being registered at key moments of energy transition. And we picked 3 what we see as kind of exemplary case studies of energy transition, as we'll talk about in more detail in a minute here, in Kilrush in County Clare, in Carna in Galway, and then in West Dublin. So To achieve these objectives, we're going to be drawing from history, literature, cultural geography, as well as some of the other, kind of disciplines and methodologies mentioned there, to understand how plans for the energy transition are tapping into these durable narratives of progress and development that, kind of transcend these different historical periods, right? How are contemporary energy transition, decarbonization, right, tied up in, let's say, modes of modernity, right, and kind of progress, and these kinds of narratives that have in the past kind of produced, let's say, sometimes unjust outcomes, right, in particular the kind of core features of climate change, but then how also people are kind of creating their own alternative or more just narratives around what the energy transition might look like. We're going to be considering how geographical and social frictions, community disenfranchisement, and then scalar imbalances of the energy transition can be navigated, let's say, more in these kind of more situated ways through these community-led engagements and arts practices, which we'll be achieving through the workshops that we're going to talk about in each of our 3 case studies. And then we're going to be using creativity as part of this methodology in the project development. So in particular, what's going to be most important to this is our resident artist, Rosie O'Reilly, who is a visual artist and with interest in interdisciplinary and these mixed media approaches to the blue humanities, kind of ocean-based humanities, because I think that a lot of this narrative, especially the kind of West Coast projects, is embedded in how these these kind of offshore futures of the energy transition are going to be taking shape, as this kind of pathway towards decarbonization. So, yeah, I think we can move on to the first case study with Thomas.
Thanks. Yeah, so the first case study is Kilrush, County Clare, which better known for as being, well, very, very close anyway to the Moneypoint power station, which is one of the, if not the biggest power station in Ireland, which is a coal-fired power station operated by the ESB. Kilrush is also adjacent, as you can see here, the green arrow, to the Midwest Broad area of interest for floating wind energy development off the coast of Clare. And there is a real, at least a top-down narrative taking place there of shifting from energy production from fossil fuels in that area to becoming a driver of floating offshore wind. And what I find really interesting is that some of the projects that are slated to maybe be developed in that area are all called Moneypoint, Moneypoint 1, Moneypoint 2, but they're all wind farms. And so there's a lot happening there. There's a lot slated to be happening there. So as I said, it's home to Moneypoint, large coal-fired power plant, and it's due to close in 2025. But if you read the Irish Times or any other source, it could also be 2029, it could be 2027. It's not entirely clear because it changes quite frequently over the last couple of months, especially. There have been a lot of mixed messaging around when will it close and what will it do, which itself is quite interesting because that sort of stunted narrative can really have an impact at we think, and anyway, at the community level as well. So what are we interested in for this particular case study? We're interested in the cultural registration of the role of Moneypoint in the electrification of Ireland and the development of the Kilrush area, shift from coal to low and zero carbon energy production, and also looking at the impact of delays in that transition and how energy sources can be layered. So is it going to be a clean transition from fossil fuels to renewables, or is there going to be some in-between stage? And heritage or cultural connections to fossil infrastructure. So example I like to use is the pullback chimneys in Dublin. When that coal-fired power plant was transitioned to a different source, and the chimneys basically weren't necessary anymore. They wanted to take them down, and there was widespread protests against that because the pullback chimneys, you can actually see them from here, I think. I can actually see them from here, are seen as a sort of a symbol of Dublin. You can buy mugs with the pullback chimneys as 2 arteries of a heart. They're very sort of seen as cultural heritage. So those kind of connections are known to be quite common, and it'd be quite interesting to see is there something similar around the Moneypoint area. So we'll be developing a workshop with community partners, the artists in residence. We'll also be collaborating with the Marion Institute funded ENACT project, which is going to be studying community level narratives in Moneypoint and also in Cork around the energy transition. So I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so then our second case study is the Sceirde Rocks offshore wind farm. off the coast of Carna, and it's one of 4 successful wind farm bids in the recent offshore renewable electricity support scheme, the ORS scheme, and the ORS is going to run again next year and for the next few years thereafter. And it's scheduled for completion in 2030. It's about 5 kilometres off the coast, although I've seen some people say 9 kilometres, so it'll definitely be visible from the shore, and up to 450 megawatts are to be generated. And in Ireland's Climate Action Plan from 2019, the goals include providing up to 80% of electricity from renewable energy by 2030 and to be carbon neutral by 2050. And the Irish government has committed to achieving 5 gigawatts of electricity from offshore wind by 2030. So there's going to be a lot more offshore wind around the coast of Ireland if these plans go ahead. And Sceirde Rocks will be the first Atlantic, as I understand it, Atlantic offshore wind farm that we'll have. And it'll be the largest infrastructure and capital investment project in this part of Connemara. Oh no, sorry, just go back. Give it a sec. Not sure, it's skipping ahead one. Can you go back? Okay. So if you don't know this area of Connemara, it's a Gaeltacht. So that means it's an Irish speaking area of Ireland, and it's historically been economically very deprived and underdeveloped. So it's a very boggy area. Is it okay? Can you go? There should be another one. Okay, we'll figure it out. And so there's not much agriculture takes place in this area. There's fish farms off the coast, salmon fish farms, and they've been in decline for a number of years now for various reasons. And then normally there'd be a lot of like traditional fishing around the area too, and that's also under decline due to climate change, pollution, and sea lice that's escaping from all the salmon farms around. So if you read any of the local pamphlets, there's always lots of like anxiety and worry about underemployment, about a lack of opportunities for people in the area, and also of demographic decline, right? This is an aging population. It's a really, really small community. Historically, they've had a lot of like shipbuilding in the area, seafaring. So all the images we have, the promotional images of the area are of like for the Sceirde Rocks development, or of hookers, right, of currachs and racing in the region. And it's an area rich in folklore, in songs and storytelling. Yep, that's the one there. I don't know what happened there. In Carna and Kilrush, this peninsula is known as Iarsathnock, which is the Windy Peninsula. And in our workshop, we're going to look at how the local community is registering the development and construction of the wind farm and its potential impact on the local ecology, society and culture of the area. Particularly given that the wind farm is likely to have a disproportionate impact on this area, given the vulnerability of the ecosystem there, but also given the precarity of the people who live in the area, right? Like I said, they feel under pressure and under threat due to lack of employment opportunities and due to the aging population in the region. And also obviously given the fact that Irish is a minority language too. So you can see how there'll be a lot of tension and friction in this community in terms of the sense of top-down development that's happening from outside. So we're going to think about narrative stories, art forms, folklore being used to mediate the shift, both in corporate PR, but also from below. And we'll look at how these narratives intersect with the Gaeltach's peripheral status within Ireland, both in terms of its cultural richness and often romanticisation in cultural imaginaries of the west of Ireland, but also in terms of these frictions that I've mentioned between underdevelopment, historical energy poverty in the region. It's a region that would have relied really heavily on turf cutting, and environmental mismanagement. So just look at the history of the environmental management of the Gaeltacht region in terms of its ecology, but also the offshore conditions too. Yeah, and if you hop along to our next slide. And I should say too that with the ORS auction, one of the things they're doing is having they're making each successful bid instantiate a community benefit fund, right? So I think it's like €2 from every megawatt that's generated by the wind farm is going to go into a fund that needs to be used for the local area. And in the case of Carna, I think that might amount to €70 million over 20 years. So they stop, the wind farm company stops paying into the fund at the 20-year mark. So again, this is a community that will disproportionately feel the impact of this money, just given the size, but given how small it is. So there's a lot at stake here. In terms of my own research, like I take kind of a post-colonial approach to this region too. So I'm interested in thinking about the rural periphery's importance to Ireland's green tech past, green tech future, but also technological past. So one of the things we'll be thinking about is how Clifton saved the landing post in 1907 for the first Marconi Tower, or transatlantic wireless telegraphy service. And we'll consider how energy transitions are in tandem with Ireland's tech industry, how atmosphere and geology are drawn into the cloud, and made profitable through renewable energy projects, and will consider how local culture and narrative help us to mediate historic and ongoing transformations of human-nature relations in Ireland.
Thanks very much. Cool. So this brings us to the final case study, which I believe will also be the final workshop. And this will be looking at Southwest Dublin, which will be kind of building on some of the research that I've been doing around the embeddedness of data centers and digital infrastructure, specifically within the energy transition, and these kinds of narratives around what role data and digitalization plays within narratives of decarbonization, right? So this is a map from the website BitPower. BitPower is an energy solutions provider for the data center industry mostly. And so you can see in Southwest Dublin, there are currently 29 operational data centers, which is, I don't think it's the majority, but it's the highest concentration in Dublin, which is already has an extremely concentrated data center landscape. As I'm sure many know, data centers in 2022 used 18% of Ireland's electricity grid on a daily basis. So they are very much a massive part of how decarbonization and how specifically the energy transition in Ireland is happening at the minute and will continue to happen. So we'll be looking specifically at parts of Southwest Dublin as these kinds of as these sites of energy transition tied up within these digital infrastructures, right? Because data centers are, as I was saying, taking an increasing role in specifically the burgeoning landscape of renewable energy utilities, whether it's from metering, right? You have the software provided by the big tech companies to monitoring energy, right? You have these partnerships between companies like General Electric and Microsoft, right? In terms of understanding, kind of in forecasting wind, for example, to storage technologies. Microsoft has done a pilot project in Ireland on using data centers as kind of absorbers of excess renewable energy, for lack of a better word, because they have these huge battery spines, right? They have this storage capacity, as well as domestic heating, which will be kind of an area that we're going to focus on, which I'm sure many of you are aware of in the Tallaght district heating scheme, especially. Because what I'm interested in this case study is kind of how digital corporations are getting locked into these emerging systems, right? How we think about how companies are becoming these utility providers through these digital infrastructures in a particular way, and what can these intersections of digitalization and decarbonization tell us about these imaginaries of the renewable energy transition, right? What are these other kinds of industries, activities, post-industrial kinds of landscapes that are taking shape through these interconnections between digital and energy infrastructures? So specifically what we're going to be doing, this is the opening of the Tallaght district heating scheme, an image there. And then the image in the bottom right is from the 2021 Venice Biennale, maybe 2020, by a group called Annex, which was made up of an interdisciplinary team of scientists, architects, artists, media scholars, where they were looking at what they called entanglement, right? The entanglement of data within the Irish landscape. And specifically, they were interested in these kinds of affective, kind of like cultural narratives of, kind of how data is not only material, but how it also kind of operates through space and how we can kind of think about its role in, various kinds of economic, environmental, social futures, right? Very interesting project. I encourage you to look it up, and we are hoping to connect with some of these people for the workshop. But so what we're going to be looking at in this, kind of in the workshop that'll come out of this is how are people engaging with this nexus of digital and energy infrastructures in their daily visions and ideas of what a low carbon future actually looks like. So looking at, related to the other case studies, right, issues of energy and fuel poverty, right, something like last year, something like 42% of the Irish population was in energy poverty, right? That's absolutely enormous, right? So how are things like, these connections between the digital and energy industries potentially working to hopefully alleviate some of these issues, but then also perhaps exacerbate some of the kinds of inequalities by the privatization of these systems, right? So specifically how privatization of utility systems and these public-private partnerships are emerging through renewable energy in these circular economies, right? Again, how are communities engaging with how these specific kinds of delivery are changing? And then how residents understand the complex processes of atmospheric and kind of resource refinement in these systems, right? I'm very interested in this narrative coming from the data center industry, which is that data centers can act as refineries of renewable electricity, right? Which they don't know, which is kind of a messier process, than what is seen as the more kind of constant supply of kind of thermal, kind of carbon fueled thermal generation, right? So it's how are data centers acting as these kinds of refineries of electricity into the useful export of data, right? And then where do communities sit within these processes, right? If they are going to be getting the benefits of, let's say, waste heat, or the benefits of, these kinds of other aspects of these digital partnerships. So the workshop will be developed in collaboration with community partners, as well as the IE-NARR resident artist, Rosie O'Reilly. So to conclude, I guess I can just read the conclusions. So we are very open to project partners. So particularly in relation to renewable energy, community engagement, and Irish narratives, kind of cultural narratives, especially past to the present, responding to themes like infrastructural development, modernization, peripheralization, sustainability, and environmental change as they relate to energy and energy transition. So if you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email. Yeah, so that's it from us. Thanks.